13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue?
Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue?
Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university.
Expert panel lined up for you to talk about free speech. But before we get into that, a lot is going on around the world and in politics. The Austin City Council is scheduled to vote tomorrow on a proposed contract between the city and the Austin Police Station. The contract has drawn heavy scrutiny related to its overall cost of $218 million, portions of which are a result of pay increases for Austin police officers, which would likely lead to a public vote on tax increases in the next 5 years to cover the cost. The contract has also been criticized for its policies on files containing allegations of police misconduct against individual officers. The contract states that those files will be available to the public once the contract is adopted, in accordance with the voter-passed Austin Police Oversight Act from 2023 and a resulting court case brought by Nonprofit Equity Action. Allegations of misconduct filed before the adoption of the contract, however, will follow state law, meaning they would not have to be provided to the public. Equity Action filed another lawsuit yesterday attempting to prevent the vote on the contract's adoption, claiming its language is ambiguous. As of now, the City Council is still scheduled to vote on the contract at tomorrow's meeting. The Texas Supreme Court halted the execution of death row inmate Robert Robertson just hours before he was scheduled to receive a lethal injection. Robertson was convicted in 2002 for the death of his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki. The cause of death was believed to have been shaken baby syndrome, a subset of abusive head trauma. Robertson has claimed innocence since the beginning, and many advocates have called out the diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome as junk science. Over the decades, Robertson's attorneys have filed for appeals and clemency, which were both rejected, with the Texas Parole Board declining to lessen his sentence. With only a few days before his execution, a subpoena was issued by the Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence. A bipartisan group of lawmakers cited new evidence and Texas's 2013 junk science law. Robertson was set to testify before lawmakers Monday, but a legal battle over whether his appearance should be in person or virtual has caused delays. The legal battle is led by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is representing the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. His defense for the department is that the delayed execution could put the state on the brink of a constitutional crisis and calls for the Supreme Court to reverse its ruling on halting the execution. Court filings are due by November 8th. Tower Talks will continue to bring you updates on this case. Coming up, we have an expert panel here to discuss free speech. Stay tuned to hear how to define free speech. Tower Talks will be right back.
Now requires students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good morning, Longhorns. Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. Joining us today for our discussion on free speech are both students and professor here at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor of Practice at the Moody College of Communication and independent documentarian Ann Lewis, government major and managing editor of the Texas Orator, Jessica Chai. Finally, managing editor and head of recruitment for the Texas Orator, Ben Castro. Thank you all so much for coming on to the panel tonight. To start off, I want to talk about how free speech is such a broad, nuanced idea. So I want to hear from all of you guys, what is your definition of free speech? How would you define it? How would you understand it? Maybe we can start with you, Professor.
Okay. So first of all, it's a really deep pleasure to be here, and particularly to be part of Texas student media for the moment. Students have been an integral part and sometimes the leading force of every movement, nearly every movement, for social change that I know about, from civil rights to Kent State and Jackson State to the protests here that led to having ethnic studies on campus, to the coming down of the Jefferson Davis statue, which I documented fairly recently, to the current student-led protests against war. And I just wanted to read something because I'm a documentary filmmaker and I like other people's words a lot more than my own. But this is a quote, and I won't tell you who said it until afterwards. So they said, freedom of speech is something that represents the very dignity of what a human being is. That's what marks us from the stones and the stars. It's the thing that marks us as just below the angels. And the person who said this is Mario Savio, who is the leader of the free speech movement at UC Berkeley in 1964. Thought of as a radical, had a background deep into freedom, summer, and Mississippi. Really knew what he was talking about. So that's, for now, that's my definition.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for reading that out. Jessica, what is your definition?
Yeah, and thank you for inviting us here tonight. I agree with Professor Lewis that free speech is integral to what it means to be a human. If we're not on this earth to communicate with each other, then what are we here for? But I simply believe it's the ability to express oneself freely. Yeah.
Very succinct. I like
Yeah.
that. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, so I work with the Order, Texas Order, and a part of my job is to onboard people, learn about them, and, amplify their voice. They are coming to me with so many different perspectives, so many different ideas, some of which I don't agree with. And nevertheless, we publish it, we edit it, and we get it through. And that's the spirit of the Order, and it's something that attracted me to the Order. My definition of free speech is simple: freedom from censorship and persecution.
Okay, yeah. And on that note, I am curious what made each of you gravitate towards what you're doing now. And you can also give us a little bit of background on what you do. We can start with you again, Anne.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little more about free speech because I think I have a little different definition of it. I always have something slightly different. But so first of all, free speech means nothing unless it offends someone. And I mean, I could do the George Carlin and begin spouting words like the word about urinating, apparently. You're not supposed to say on television, or you weren't, according to him. So he did this whole routine about 7 offensive words that you're never supposed to say on television. And that was kind of, that's an interesting take. But there are 2 points of it, really, that he makes that are, first of all, free speech means nothing unless it's offensive to somebody, right? And second of all, that somebody has to involve the government. So when you think about this, so there was this guy in Mississippi that decided to report George Carlin to the FCC for offensive language. And because his 15-year-old son was in the car when Carlin said these words, and that got Carlin arrested. And I think it's interesting. And I'm starting on a very light note because I have other things that I think are important to understand about free speech too. But we're sitting in what is a state university, a public university. And so technically, we're sitting in government, right? When you think about it. And so when we protest here, it does have both of those aspects of being offensive to somebody, if the protest is suppressed, for example, and being offensive to government. So there's something in that. I have a couple of other things, but I want to let other people speak. But I mean, first of all, I don't think that freedom of speech is about my right to pop off. I think it's about your right to hear. And that's another thing, particularly in a university context, that's absolutely critical. And I do have a quote to that, but I'll save that. And then the other thing is it's so tightly tied in the First Amendment to the right to assembly. And, and it's the First Amendment. So this is really important stuff. And we have to understand it in context of social change. I don't think it's a neutral, the ACLU kind of sees this very neutrally, and a lot of people do. I personally don't, and it's partly because I've talked to people that have been really caught up in this question, and they have much more of these kinds of different attitudes towards it, which are core ideas about how you create change in your country, how you build a better new world. And so that's kind of, I have a little bit different attitude towards it, but I can get to the other stuff.
Yeah, I do want to know, what are y'all's thoughts on this?
I think that it was in the First Amendment for a reason, and like Ben was saying earlier, I was attracted to the Texas Orator because of how we champion a diversity of views, We don't let people in just because of, the way that they align with us. We want to have a healthy place where everybody can express what they believe, what they disagree on, and I think that having that kind of space for students to talk about what they believe in is so incredibly important. And there's a reason why authoritarian countries target free speech as one of the first mechanisms to take control. It's because when you don't let people express their thoughts and opinions, you stifle that kind of community, that momentum that people can generate together. And it's so powerful to be able to take it away from people, because that's the first way that they begin a movement for change.
Well said.
Yes,
Very
definitely.
well said. Wow. So when I'm onboarding people for the order, I fill them in on two things. Because we do have rules, you can't write about anything. But the only two rules we have is you don't plagiarize, naturally. And if you're going to advocate for violence, don't do it directly, try to do it satirically. We don't want to get in trouble with people. Because unfortunately, free speech isn't, I feel like those are fair rules, right? What do you guys think on those rules?
Well, it is peaceably sampled in the First Amendment.
Right.
I don't think any of us, if anything, we want less violence in this world, right?
Yeah. You can have free speech without violence.
Yes, of course, but you can't without somebody taking offense.
Right.
A lot of nuances here. And you brought up, Jessica, authoritarian countries and how getting rid of free speech is that first step. I do want to ask about free speech in the context of our democracy. How would you say free speech contributes to like a healthy functioning of democracy in the U.S.?
Should I go?
Whoever wants to
I'm
pick it
happy
up.
to. Okay, so I made a film about a woman named Ann Braden. And Ann Braden and her husband bought a house for a black couple in Louisville, and then proceeded to get, the house was bombed, and then they got charged with sedition against the state of Kentucky. And went to jail for a while, but it turns out you can't have sedition against a state, so they got off. This rolls around into a story and a quote, but the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was an outgrowth of McCarthyism, went after, in particular, her husband, and he pleaded, along with Pete Seeger and a number of, maybe, I think it was 30-something people, pleaded the First Amendment and not the Fifth Amendment. Most people were saying, I won't talk about whether I'm a communist or not because I refuse to incriminate myself. These people said, no, it's not about that, it's about the First Amendment and the rights of free speech and free assembly. And so there became, he went off to jail for a year as a result. But this is what, and Dr. King led the committee to release him from jail. So this is, this is kind of part of our history in the attempt to expand democracy. Yeah. But so I want to read a quote from Braden because I made a film about her, so I have all these quotes, and it isn't I, it's we, because a lot of people make films always together. The whole idea of the right of free speech is not your right to speak, but my right to hear. So people can hear different ideas, not just because I want to get up and speak. I say it guarantees the right to organize, because your right to speak, to meet, to print, because freedom of the press is also part of the First Amendment, to petition the government, that's organizing is what it is. It's the freedom to organize against policies of the government that are wrong. It was born in struggle. It was because people insisted on it, and there's been a struggle ever since to make it mean something. And the only time it's meant something is when people struggled for it. So this is a kind of a, again, that kind of activist approach to this. Mm-hmm. Most people probably don't need the right to free speech. Most people. They might in order to hear somebody, but most people aren't going to get attacked because they say something. But some people do. And so you really have to understand this, I think, in the context of a right is not important unless it in some way protects you, right? And so I don't know that it was a grand success that the Bradens were really protected, but they were able to use this attack on them as a platform for, among other things, freedom of speech. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think in the context of a democracy, I mean, the basis for America was that our government was one that was, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so when you have a nation that's as diverse as America, you need to have those different points of view. Otherwise, it becomes homogenous, and then you have that dangerous sort of groupthink mentality. But I think that our nation has really struggled, especially during war times, to embrace the right of free speech. And I think what's ironic is that they don't try to really censor it so much, saying that like you can't have free speech. They narrowly tailor the definition of free speech in a way that people still believe that American values, that kind of ideal, but still ends up censoring certain people. So I think that for a democracy, you need to have that kind of tension. You need to have disagreements in order to fully represent everybody. And that comes at, it takes you need to invest in that. It's a cost, definitely. And with, you've seen like sometimes there's legislative gridlock, but all that, I believe, is the way that our government is designed to get as many points of view in there as possible.
Very well said. Very well said. To me, it's a bravery thing, right? You have to be brave enough to criticize when things are wrong, whether that be your president declares invades a country illegally or whatever, or your boss is depressing your wages. Inflation's going up, and you're not getting any increase in your paycheck. Democracy can be on the workplace level just as well as it can be on a national level. And on all of those degrees, there has to be people willing to criticize, and those people shouldn't be censored or persecuted or arrested, killed. They should have that right. Yeah.
Yeah. Any more thoughts here?
I think it's taken some trial and error. In the court levels, I'm thinking of so many Supreme Court cases, the obscenity cases, the Red Scare cases, the school protest cases, racial discrimination cases. All of those have sort of shaped and evolved the way that our nation strives to protect free speech, if not the younger generations. It's something that we will continually have to fight again and again for. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to think of this also as a kind of a collective process. In other words, it isn't just my right to go say, boy, I don't like the way, my boss is treating me.
Right.
It's also the right of me to get other people together with me, for them to hear the way the boss is treating me, and for us to join together in solidarity, and that's that assembly right. And it's really tied, because if I go to the boss and say, hey, I don't like the way you're treating me, he's going to fire me. I mean, that's just the way it works pretty much, right? But if everybody, goes together and says, look, you've been mistreating this human being, we need you to stop it, then there's a likelihood that things will improve, right?
Power in a union.
And I won't get fired, So the freedom of speech and has to be coupled in some way with freedom of assembly, I think, for it to have any validity or power. And so it's that hearing component, that listening component, that I think is really key here, that we have to understand it as a collective right. And by that I don't mean groupthink, I don't mean propagandizing people. I mean, we're supposed to have freedom of the press, right? But I do mean this question of people being in solidarity with each other in order to defend the rights of an individual or a group of people.
A very nice way to end off our first section of the panel, as we will be talking more about protests, that kind of union, later on in the night. But thank you all for these insights so far. When we come back, more on the challenges of implementing free speech. Towers will be back.
Or shine. At Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV. Welcome back to Tower Talks. We discussed a lot about the importance of free speech. While in the United States it's a constitutional right, many challenges appear around the ethical considerations of free speech. So Professor Lewis, another question for you. With your extensive work in documentaries regarding protests, what are some of the biggest challenges you face when you're filming, particularly around the dynamics of free speech?
Well, I think free speech happens more in editing than in filming. In filming, you're seizing opportunity and you're just there and you're grabbing everything you can. And there's some of that may be violence. Some of it is just this wonderful experience of being places that you ordinarily wouldn't be and perceiving things. So I can tell you, let me talk about the Jefferson Davis statue event here, which was on a Sunday morning. The student government had demanded that the Jefferson Davis statue come down, which was right oh, I'm sorry, I'm bad with geography, but there was Woodrow Wilson and Jefferson Davis, and I was doing another film, and I spoke with this wonderful labor historian here, Emilio Zamora.
Yeah.
And he had talked, I asked him about, because you could see the Jefferson Davis statue from his office, and he said, oh, you know, those guys, he said, you know, there's so much important things here, you know. But then the student government got very involved in trying to get it taken down. And yes, it was very carefully packaged and removed very carefully. It took several hours to get this thing down. And there were people there on both sides. And I'm like, you know, it's like taking forever. I just want it to be moved so we can go on with filming, right? And we're watching, you know, the wrapping of the thing and all that. And so, but there were these counter-protesters as well that were very angry that the statue was coming down. So, of course, we began talking to them. And then at the end of this scene, there's this conversation between the guy he's on the hate list of the Southern Poverty Law Center and everything. And he's a member of the Sons of the Confederacy or something like that. And he's a lawyer. And then on the other side is a student. And what are they discussing? They're discussing whether this is a legitimate piece of art, this statue. And the student is saying, because the guy from the Confederacy says it's like ripping the eyes out of the Mona Lisa, taking the statue down, right? And the student comes back and says, I don't think it's like it's Da Vinci. You know, it's not very good art. And this guy comes back and says, it's the best art we have in Texas. And the student says, no, there's a lot better art in Texas. So it's this hilarious, really, conversation, which ends up with some lines about Black Lives Matter and some lines about the rights of the gray or the Confederacy. And it becomes, you know, it has its political character to it. But I'm throwing that out there because that's an example of two people exercising free speech in quite a funny kind of casual way that you get captured on film, and it has a life of its own in a way. So you're seeing this thing play out in a different kind of way than you would, you know, we got to take the statue down. No, we got to leave it up. You know, it's playing itself out in a way that's expressive. And so I don't know how I got off on that, but it's challenging to get that kind of material because so often you don't get the material that would really move people to a greater understanding when you just have people spouting generalities at each other, which I don't think is free speech. And again, I don't think it's free speech unless you have something that in some way provokes a response. And that's the challenge always, is to find a way to communicate what people are actually feeling and what their perceptions are. Because without changing perception, you don't get social change. So for me, it's always challenging and always interesting and worth listening to people talk about these things. Yeah.
Well, that's a very interesting story that displays this. I have a question now for you, Ben and Jessica. Sure. As the managing editors of the Texas Orator, in your view, what is the role of an editor in upholding free speech but also maintaining journalistic integrity?
We've actually just started talking about this within our own. We had I mean, if you're feeling willing to speak about this, you're the...
Sure. I think it's definitely being an editor is a very sacred role because you're trying to convey the voice of the writer without imposing yourself on the process. I would want to say that I think that for us specifically, the point in allowing students to convey their views is so that we get that meaningful dialogue. Because I don't think that when two people disagree, it's not enough to just say, I disagree with you because you're wrong. I think it's very valuable to understand the rationale behind why people think the way that they think, why they believe the things that they believe. And so you get more productive conversations that way instead of just clashing and butting heads without getting anywhere. As for your question about the role of editing, I think that editing should just be about refining what a writer intends to say. And I know that can be difficult because you're not that person. The way I approach it is through a lens of empathy. I'm literally placing myself in the shoes of the writer. I'm a writer myself. And I read through their piece to try to really digest it and see it through their eyes. And in that way, I just help them tweak bits here and there so that, you know, their point stands across more clearly. And of course, it's a collaborative process. So anything that I say is merely suggestion. They can feel completely free to disregard my suggestions. Usually that doesn't happen. And we have those sort of conversations back and forth so that we really prioritize the writer's genuine intent. But Ben?
Yeah, it's about clarity. Like Jess said, we're not going to change your whole piece or argue with you, oh, we disagree this way or that way. We onboard you, letting you know that you can write about almost whatever you want, as long as you don't plagiarize. And so we keep to that. When you publish a piece with us, or you put a piece in our queue, we're going to assign editors to it that are looking for like punctuation, like clarifying like double negatives and things like that, or like passive voice. These very basic things that will help the article shine, be better, and help their view get across more succinctly. But we're not changing their view. We'll gladly publish nearly anything.
Okay, yeah. Another kind of follow-up question to this. Looking at your like editorial guidelines as a publication, how are you balancing free speech with that responsibility, not just to like journalistic integrity, but like avoiding harm and avoiding misinformation and like hate speech? And then maybe also you as well, when you are creating documentaries, how do you balance that? It's tricky.
It's a tricky question.
Documentaries aren't at the same standard as journalistic integrity, by the way, because they do have a point of view. So frequently, some of the best ones have a point of view. So my sensibility about that is to be as transparent as possible. If you do have a prejudice, and you're writing something, you want to be very clear what you're, that you have a certain bent in your thinking, Sometimes this is quite simple. I mean, you make a film about domestic violence shelter, you're not going to be on the side of the perpetrator, right? So it's although it becomes a kind of an institutional look for me, like what are the institutions and how are they responding to this need? More than, this guy against this woman, But I think I teach editing, and I think there's always ethics involved. It's very difficult. Because you see so much unethical stuff on television already. And if you know what the actual situation is, you can identify the lack of truth. And I think it has a lot to do with telling the truth more than anything, and being fair, not being equal time, but being fair and doing your best to tell the truth, which is, people have different viewpoints about what that is, but I think we all know pretty much, when it's misinformation or when it's garbage, and you can always tell when somebody's lying on camera. It's an amazing thing. I mean, if you look at hours and hours of footage, which I do, I always know when somebody's lying, and it's the worst thing that you can have happen to you, because then all you can say is that the person's a liar and you don't get really what they're thinking. You don't get the truth. But telling the truth is the ethical stand, I think, for all of us.
For us, at least, so we differ from a normal news reporting organization. We are more of a student-based journalism. So for us, the truth is allowing people to tell their own truths, or their own beliefs at least. So yeah, it's I feel like we're less in the fact-based area, more in the editorials, just expressing opinions simply. But the question you asked about where to draw the line, I think that's definitely a very hard balance to strike. But Ben put it pretty clearly earlier, is that essentially our only rule is for you to not incite violence. Otherwise, we do our best to uphold every student's right to free speech.
Did you want to add anything, Ben?
I mean, that was well said. Maybe we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, definitely. One quick question for all of you before we go on to break. I'm curious how you respond to backlash or criticism, whenever you have articles or whenever you've created something that is maybe a little more controversial, because you are just exercising this right to free speech. But how do you deal with that backlash?
I like it. I mean, I did a film about women that worked in fast food restaurants in Kentucky, and they got very angry at us, and it was great just listening to what they had to say in their criticism of this film, because they said, no, we're providing economic opportunity to people that ordinarily wouldn't have a job at all. And the whole film was about how they were exploiting people, and nobody was ever going to make a living wage, And so it became a wonderful way to push the film forward in a way. And I find that, I did a film about strip mining, and they got very angry. The coal company got very angry at me, and was strip mining a guy. There were laws that let you strip mine land without permission of the landowner if you owned the mineral rights. And and I was on public television, and this guy from the corporation said, from the coal company said, I said, how can you, isn't it the landowner's land? And he said, no, it's not his land. It was like, well, okay, now we have a private property question here. So I'm just saying the backlash is, if people are being honest and they honestly disagree with you, usually their reasons are their truth, and you don't agree with it, so it's helpful, actually. I think that debate, having honest out there, back and forth, if there's some way that it's going to make us understand the other person's position, then I think it's great.
I think that it's like what you said earlier, that the true test of free speech is at those outer limits when you do spark debate and disagreement. So, I mean, the way that we handle any kind of criticism is that usually it's directed at the author or the substance of the piece, or indicting some argument that they made. And I only think that's a testament to the kind of culture that we're creating, or the kind of space that we're creating where people can openly express disagreement. And I don't think that's a sign of, I don't think that's a bad sign, at least. I think that's actually a step towards progress, where people can have those kinds of difficult conversations with each other, yeah.
I like it. I like criticism. I mean, it's hard sometimes, and you get used to it, But, I mean, if you disagree with something I write, please. I mean, there's a comment section. I would love to read it, read your comments, read your opinions, and engage with them, because any attention and feedback would be lovely. And even if that is criticism helps us improve as people and as society.
Yeah, definitely well said, all of you. Thank you for all the insight again at this section, the second section of the panel. When we come back, we'll be talking about the university response to the recent protests. Towers will be back.
"13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. In April of 2024, the University of Texas at Austin was put in the national spotlight when pro-Palestinian protesters were met with excessive force by armed Texas troopers, and almost 60 arrests were made. While protests had sprung up during this time around Texas, UT Austin was the only one that saw mass arrests take place. So, a question for all of you guys. I want to know if you witnessed the protests. Were you there? Can you talk a little bit about it? And what are your thoughts on the force that was displayed by these Texas troopers? Let's start with you, Anne, and then we can...
All right. Well, first, I really have to do a disclaimer, because when I'm speaking, I'm not speaking for my department or the college, or, I'm speaking as an individual, and in this case, particularly as a labor union person. Yes, I was there, and I will talk about it, but I want to put it in a little bit more perspective, and I have another quote, so if that's okay. And this is from Anne Braden again, and what she says is, it's a different country because of what happened in the 1960s. And then that happened because young people all through the South stood up and said, we're going to change this thing. And we will risk our lives, and they did, and some of them gave their lives. They were trying to be able to sit at a lunch counter and get a cup of coffee. Well, you don't risk your life for a cup of coffee. They were trying to get the right to vote, which is terribly important, but I'm not sure you risk your life even for the right to vote. And I think I would say, maybe you don't risk your life for the right to free speech either. This is what she goes on to say. They risked their lives because they had a vision of a whole different world where people's needs came first, where people cooperated instead of dog-eat-dog trying to step on another person. They had a dream they called the beloved community, not just a community where people would love each other, but a just community for everybody. They had that vision. Nonviolent direct action was people themselves taking to the streets. And for me, this puts this protest in a context of people who are struggling to make the world a better world. And it's a different, I have very strong feelings about the protests. I have very strong feelings about the response of the police. but I also have a very strong feeling that this was, in some ways, of an important thing that we experienced, and that what we experienced what had the negative of the suppression and what was actually a fairly brutal and violent treatment of students here and staff here, but also had that possibility of change, and in some ways was an important experience for students to have here and staff to have here, and positive in its own way. So I kind of want to look at it that way as well. And then I have other feelings that I have, of course, but let me pass it along.
So I was present during the protests, and it was a lot. More and more happened as it kept unfolding. The way that I perceived it, at least when the first arrest started happening on Speedway, the first person who was arrested was taken right as he was telling the protesters to disperse and follow the officer orders. And then I saw another girl who was in a neon vest, presumably to keep protesters safe, to keep them, organized and in line. She also, the way that it happened was that officers went in and looked around in the crowd of students and swooped in on people in the sidelines and grabbed people and dragged them out, and then formed a bike cage around them. So I feel like there definitely was, it was a travesty. The response to the protests were a travesty, and for a university that claims to champion free speech, well, I think that their actions spoke volumes more than what they claimed to value. And the brutal attacks on students with the tear gas and the bullets and the grabbing them, dragging them around, that's no way to protect free speech. But what was ironic is that immediately after, we all got sent a message that this university hails free speech, like this is our value, and yet they continued to suppress it that way. So I think the irony of, that's what I was saying earlier, the way that they narrowly tailor free speech is you can have your speech until you say something that offends us, right? That doesn't align with our hidden values. So yeah, it was, simply put, it was pretty chaotic, and it was definitely, it meant something.
And do you have any thoughts you want to share on this as well?
I was on campus. I wasn't participating, but I remember the helicopters overhead. I was in an outdoor lecture that day, and I remember hearing the horses, seeing their crap on Speedway. And as a student of history, I just kept replaying scenes that I'd read about or seen, or scenes of students being massacred or put down, and I was just hoping, like, can do this? Please, no one get killed here, please. That was just replaying over and over in my head. And I remember hearing the text, seeing the text, hearing the intercom. It was a terrible day, but there is some good from it. I think this is a reminder to us that free speech is not guaranteed, and that we are vulnerable. Sometimes you go through life, especially, we live fairly good lives here in the United States. We're university students, we have that privilege to study, to learn. But it's a reminder that, it can happen to us.
Yeah. So I just have one final question for all of you to wrap up this panel. In honor of Free Speech Week that we're in right now, I'd like to hear each of you give us a little bit of something our viewers can do at home to protect their rights to free speech. What are some actionable items they can do, or things they can be thinking about. Ben, can we actually start with you and then come down the line?
I think Professor Lewis here mentioned this earlier, but organize with people and know that people on your same level, the university might not protect you, but your peers can. I mean, if it comes down to it, grabbing someone from a crowd or from a protest, hopefully you have friends next to you that can keep you, it becomes very personal. So make friends, and that'll keep you safe, hopefully.
That's always good advice. My advice would be to just have conversations with your friends about things that are important to our world. Yeah, I think that we take for granted the fact that we do live in America, and it's a privilege to be in our position and to be able to talk about those things and express our concerns. So, same thing with your friends, your newly made friends. Have those kinds of conversations with them, with your family members. If you are able to do that, talk about things, just so that you can continue to in the future.
I think people should just practice it. But I really like both Ben and Jess's response. I think that idea that we're all in this together and we're going to support each other, and we're going to support rights of people who other people want to suppress. I think that's important. There's a report that I think is really worth reading that came from the Committee of Council on Academic Freedom and Responsibility, which is a group of people that are part of faculty council here. And it came out in July, and it was really very critical of both the police presence on campus and also the new guidelines, which most likely are unconstitutional. I mean, Abbott's guidelines on campus free speech are very questionable, I believe. But this inclusion of not allowing face coverings, for example, not allowing, and so this committee came up with ideas, and there are 4 of them that are really simple. One of them is no prior restraint. Before anything happens, you're suppressing it, which is what they did, I think. Allowing face coverings, no blanket criminal charges during protests, and high standards of due process in disciplinary actions against students. And that came out in July, and yet, we haven't seen a response. So I would say to demand a response from the leadership.
"13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth."
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody